Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
I have Kris Ann and Robyn with me today, and we are really excited to have Kris Ann on today. We are going to be tackling the topic of codependency. So this has been on my heart for a couple of months now. I heard Kris Ann share some things about what God revealed to her in that area, and I just knew I wanted to have her on to talk about that. So we're really excited. I've known Kris Ann for quite a few years. She was a Bible study mentor for me for many years. And we were always similarly going through things at the same time. I remember really connecting with you on a deep level. It felt like everything that you were going through, I happened to be going through that week too. And it was really interesting to see. So I'm just really grateful for your friendship. And Robyn has gotten to know you within the past couple of years as well.
It's been a blessing. And Kris Ann is actually working with Kevin Shippers as well, who we've had on. And she's kind of joining us actually in the Healing the Roots course. And so she has so graciously agreed to be one of the spiritual coaches. So people who go through the course with us this winter will have the option of working with Kris Ann a couple times a month as they go through the course, as they dive deeper into what's going on with them spiritually and how to embrace spiritual healing. So we were super excited about having Kris Ann, just because we want other people to know Kris Ann. She's just a wonderful human being, and I've so enjoyed getting to know her. And I admire you so much, Kris Ann. You're just a beautiful person, and you have lived through so much. And as I listened to a little prequel to what we're going to talk about today, I just realized
she gave us the almost full scoop.
But as I'm listening, I'm realizing, I have had exposure to a lot of codependent stuff too. And thank God he delivered me from that. But I was setting myself up for a life of that with my first husband. And I'm just so grateful that God kind of delivered me from that as soon as he did. And I just thought, God, I bet there's probably few people in the earth who haven't been touched by codependency in some way. So I'm really excited that you're going to talk about it today.
Yeah, me too. So do you want to kind of open us up? I know today we're kind of dive into the topic of codependency in family relationships and how that impacted you when you were growing up.
Okay. Yeah. I'm excited to be here. When you asked me to speak about codependency, initially I was really excited because this is something I've struggled with my whole life. And yet it really wasn't until I was pretty in the thick of codependent behavior and being really harmed by it that I started to recognize it. And I would say in the past few years, I've become way more of an expert than I wish I were. But here's the beautiful thing. I know that God is a God who redeems things, who does take ashes and turn it into beauty. And I am excited to share my story because I believe that'll be helpful to others. And honestly, and I think it's healing for me to share it.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yes. So I think I'm just going to start with kind of some textbook information about what codependency is.
Yeah, that'd be super helpful.
Okay, sounds good. Because I know I grew up, the only time I heard of codependency was in relation to alcoholic or, chemical addiction relationships. And that's not where this started for me. So here's what codependency is. It's a dysfunctional relationship dynamic where one person assumes the role of the giver and they sacrifice their own needs and well-being for the sake of the other. The other is the taker. The bond in question doesn't have to be romantic. It can easily occur between parent and child, in friend relationships, with other family members, even in work relationships. Healthy relationships are mutually beneficial. We don't see that in a codependent relationship. They're one-sided. Typically, one person is cast aside in the role of constant caregiver. And by being caring and highly functional and helpful, that person is said to support, perpetuate, or enable a loved one's irresponsible or destructive behavior.
So you can overlook things that need to be looked at.
Yes, exactly. Something can be staring me in the face, and I'm like, that's not a red flag. That's okay. Let's just pretty this up. And I remember describing it as codependency kind of looks like there's a pile of crap in your living room. And I'm like, well, I see the pile of crap. We can't pretend it's not there, but I'm going to like douse it in like gold glitter. We're going to make it look prettier.
Poopery.
Yeah, poopery. Exactly. We're going to reframe this thing. So, and the giver tends to be overly responsible. When I did finally get into therapy, that's the first thing my therapist said. She evaluated me. She's like, you're highly responsible. And I am. And I think we think of that as a good thing. But when it's dished out in the wrong context, it can be incredibly unhealthy and unhelpful. So overly responsible, making excuses for the taker. Again, that's the throwing gold glitter on it. We're just going to reframe this and make an excuse so it's okay. Taking over their obligations. Givers tend to be self-critical. I definitely have experienced that constant criticism. In fact, I think until fairly recently, I've had sort of this ongoing critical dialogue in my own mind towards myself.
Wow.
I tend to want to fix or rescue others because it makes them feel needed. And I really did feel like I have felt like my whole worth and value is tied up in how well I can care for others.
Wow.
Even though I have known and know for a long time who I am in Christ. In fact, like, I think it's some of the worst points of my codependent relationships. I would say that out loud. I know who I am. Like, I know who I am. And yet there's this tension between, our flesh that defaults to what it knows, what it wants, what feels right, and the spirit. So,
yeah, and you had that growing up, and it was kind of deeply planted in you from a young age, and that's just how you've coped with things ever since then, because it's what you knew.
That's exactly right. So yeah, codependency often, not always, but often stems from parenting that invalidates the thoughts and feelings of children, based on the belief that children are too immature to have their own ideas. And so I definitely was raised that way. I think I want to preface this by saying, I don't think that, I'm confident that my parents did the best that they could. I honestly have no animosity towards them. There was nothing malicious in how they raised me. But unfortunately, the way that I was raised really did negatively impact how I developed in this world and how I showed up. So I was the oldest of 5 children, and I recall my parents, especially my mom, painting the world as a terrifying place. So that was the first thing. Like, I felt afraid of anything outside the home. And this was kind of in you guys are younger than me, but the Adam Walsh era, are you familiar with
Unsolved
that?
Mysteries?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I
this was
absolutely
before
am. Kris
Unsolved
Ann.
Mysteries. But yes.
Monique has the DVD. So.
No, but I have watched it on Netflix, and growing up, we watched that frequently. So
yes. So that happened while I was a child, and my parents were very fearful and really fed that fear into us that we were going to be kidnapped, that we could just be at a store, we could be anywhere, we weren't safe any place.
Wow.
And so there was that. I
know that. Well, I mean, not to that level, but I do know what that feels like.
Yeah. And again, from a parenting perspective, I have no doubt that they were seeking to protect me.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But the way that I received it the message I received was, the world is frightening and the only safe place is home and my family.
Wow. Well, a lot of things can happen at the home too. So
they can.
Good thing they didn't know about those things.
Right. So I think the other thing that really impacted me or contributed to codependency for me was that, as the oldest, my mom would often say to me, if my siblings misbehaved, it was my fault. I had set a wrong example, that I wasn't leading them rightly. And at the time, it made sense to me. I was like, yeah, I'm the oldest. She told me I was the oldest. I should behave differently. But in hindsight, I'm like, that was not my role. My job was to be a child, and it was really put on me early that I was responsible for how everyone else behaved in the household.
Wow.
And
I wonder why that was. I mean, sorry if I'm interrupting,
no.
but that just is an interesting thing to think about, to put that kind of pressure on a child just because they're older than the others just doesn't seem quite right.
And it's not right.
I can totally see it though. I mean, I'm just thinking about how I talk with my oldest, and I will tell him, like, you are setting an example. So I need you to do that for your siblings. So I don't know if it's like 100% wrong to say those things, but to say then if his brother and sister are messing up, that it's his fault for that, then that's totally wrong. Right.
Yeah.
But I do, I think I'll even tell my children as they're going out, it's like, look, you're setting an example even for younger kiddos out there, like how to be like Jesus. So let's be an example. You know, so I don't know. I think the fact that she turned it and then would blame their behavior on you, I think that's where it really went off.
Right. I fully agree. I think that's the thing. It wasn't like malicious behavior. And I think there were right reasons behind it. And I think sometimes it's just the level of sensitivity I had as a child. Like we're all created differently. And another child may not have been impacted in the same way that I was.
Right.
And we all fall short, right? We all make mistakes as parents, as children, you know, and it very well could have been just, I
was thinking about this in the context of the personality types, you know, the talker, the leader, the thinker, and the peacemaker. And I thought, I bet you're a peacemaker. And I'm a peacemaker. So I can relate so much to what you're talking about, because if you put a peacemaker as an older child, like that can create some issues. And just it becomes how you process things. I have 3 different children. They all are 3 different personality types. And so how I talk to my daughter, who's a peacemaker, has to be so different. And I'm listening to what you're saying and I'm going, ooh, okay, I've got to check even more what I'm saying and doing, because how she is going to take it could be harmful, where I could say it to my son and he would process it the way that I'm intending him to, where she would take it someplace else.
Totally. That makes sense.
And I see her trying to earn my love by doing acts of service and trying to make the home peaceful. And I've had to reassure her and say, do you know I love you? And it has nothing to do with what you do for me, honey. That I'd love you if you didn't clean the house, that I'd love you if you did, you know. And she just started to tear up and cry. And I could see it's like that peacemaker part of her somehow feels that she has to earn love from me.
Wow.
You know, and then it's like, oh no, I don't ever want her to go down that track, you know?
Yeah, it's harmful. Yeah,
absolutely.
We're seeing right here, case in point.
Right. I know.
The 50-year-old virgin.
That's right. From way out there. But no, this is a great conversation for those reasons. Like I said, I don't believe they were malicious, and for whatever reason, I received it in a way that became a form of bondage for me.
Yeah. What an interesting component, though, real quick, to just bring that in, because I think that will hopefully minister to parents, even to how they communicate to their children, to just remind, like, oh yeah, I've been maybe putting some undue pressure on them without even realizing it. And their personality types, that's fascinating. I wouldn't have even thought about that. You know, especially with only having like one kid, there's not that dynamic like in my home where I'm like trying to tell River, I'm just trying to tell her, be good. You don't got any example for anyone else except for the dog. But,
that's hilarious. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I think also in the home, my parents had a very rigid religious structure. So I did grow up being very aware of God. My dad had a born again experience shortly before he met my mom, I believe. But he was so rigid and very legalistic. And again, you know, it's what you're told is what you're told. And I think he was just walking out what he knew. But I know he made my mom like burn all of her secular books and all of her secular records. And
get that on the bonfire, baby.
That's exactly right. And I think she was resentful because she shared that with us several times. Like, he made me. And I think that sort of became like embedded itself in the foundation of who I was too, where somehow as women, we're made to do things. And that's just how that is. Yeah. And so
that could have been a conversation, like looking over the materials and just making sure that they lined up with the family values instead of just everything.
Yes. It totally
sounds like it was a traumatic event for her.
It does. Yeah. We heard about it often. And I think also whether they didn't necessarily say this straight out, but there was an understanding that we were responsible for our mom and dad's emotions. Like if they were sad, it was because we had done something wrong. And that's too much for a child to carry. But I really carried that. And emotions like anger, sadness, fear, even pain were considered very negative. And we would be, mocked, shut down, that's wrong, you're wrong, that's bad. And I actually was very demonstrative with my emotions for a long time at home. In fact, I struggled with constant fear. We called it shy, but there was just like an absolute fear of everything. And I would say like low grade, constant depression for as long as I can remember. But when I tried to express that or show that with my feelings, I was told to stop immediately, that I was being bad, I was being wrong. And so later in my life, and I know we're not there yet, but later in my life, much later, I recognized that I had actually shut off access to anger and to sadness. And it was very difficult. I'm still learning how to recognize it in myself and how to express it in a way that's healthy. And I think that led to some of my later situations too with codependency, because God gives us anger to signal that something's wrong. Yeah. So when I'm bypassing that constantly, I'm missing things.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yep. So anyway, I think, back with my mom and dad, I had a role then to play, and I learned to play it really well. It didn't feel authentic. In fact, I don't know that I ever felt like I knew who I was until my late 20s. But my role was to behave in public. They felt very proud of us and very pleased with us if we sat quietly, if we didn't say anything, if we weren't messing around. Those were the things that were reinforced. And again, those aren't bad things. Yeah. But at home, we were expected to be quiet unless we were very happy, to be very obedient and immediately so. And to excel in academics. Like they wanted to be proud of us. And so I did become a performer because I wanted to earn those accolades, and would shut down the things in myself that I knew wouldn't be well received. And I think it was go ahead.
Oh, just saying you had to just kind of mold into that image that you felt that they wanted you to be.
Right. I felt like I needed to be that in order to be loved. Oh. And we all, like God's given us a desire to be seen and to be loved and to be accepted for who we truly are. And when as a child you feel like you can't be accepted and loved for who you are, then you'll go to what you believe will. Exactly.
Yeah, oh, that's painful.
I can relate 100%.
Yeah, we recently talked about that in a recent episode too. Even falling into just getting that love from someone else, at a young age. That's hard.
Absolutely. And then I think I was 9 when my mom went back to work, and that was the whole thing. We were farmers. My dad lost most of the farm in the 80s, farm crisis. And she had to go back to work, and she's very resentful and very angry. I think I lost the sweet side of my mom when she returned to work. She would come home from work angry, yelling at us, telling us we were awful kids because we weren't quiet. Like we would be scrambling to Mom's home and we need help with this. And, we've been waiting all day. And she was in the teaching profession. She came home with more homework than the students did. So she was like, I am exhausted, leave me alone. But she would say that she wanted to take my baby brother, John, who was honestly the sweetest little gift. But she was going to take him because he was the only one she really wanted to spend time with. And she wanted to move to an apartment in town and just leave us all behind. Her life would be so much better. And I just internalized all of that too, and just added that to the other things that I'd really adopted about who I am in this world. And
without knowing God yourself personally, it's easy to do.
Yes. And I will piggyback off that a little bit. She did, when she talked about God, and I'm sure she got this from her mom, and maybe her mom got it from her mom, who knows where it started, but she would portray God as, she would use God to control us. She would say, God is up there watching you. There's nothing he misses. And every time you do something wrong, He is putting a black mark in his book. And she
Kris
created this
Ann.
picture of like a page in a book covered in black, messy ink because, So I felt like this was an angry, condemning God. Yes.
That right there is so sad to me to hear, because it just devastates my heart. And I think you're not alone in that. And I think that's why so many people have so many different struggles with God is because of that. It's because of that. And exactly like you said, it could have been a generational thing.
Oh, totally.
It could have been passed down from her mom and then her mom. But oh my goodness, I mean, you read the Bible, like Romans 8, and you realize like there's no condemnation and all of that. Just
exactly. We have this so loving, merciful, amazing God. And we showed up at church every single week. In fact, I had perfect attendance for 13 years. And my parents were very proud of that. Yeah,
until today.
I got a half credit today. That's right. We worshiped together and I almost didn't show up, but I did. That's so funny. I was being rebellious. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So my view of God was not a good one. But when we did go to church, I would hear that he loved all of us. So there was this weird conflict between the God that was portrayed in my home and the God that I was taught about in Sunday school. And I just could not make sense of it. It was very strange for me.
Yeah, that would be confusing.
So I think my escape was books. Like, I think if I'd had access to drugs or something, that would have been, but I didn't. And we were super sheltered. So we were raised in what I would say was a form of like religious authoritarian parenting. We're taught just to obey. We're taught to fall in line. We're taught to agree with our parents. We're taught to adopt all of their beliefs. We're not allowed to have our own thoughts. Thinking something different gets us kind of like booted out of the, kicked off the island kind of thing. And again, I think it was innocently incorporated, probably was something that, either they'd learned from, they actually said that they were receiving guidance from, prominent Christian counselors at the time, and that they really believed that the way that they were doing things was the best way to do it. And so we didn't talk about our business outside the family. There were like rules in the family. And so that created a lot of shame too. Like we can't talk about stuff. And so there must be stuff that's wrong with us. And we had to present really well all the time. We had to conform to the family wishes. And through all of this, I constantly believed there was something wrong with me because the mind and heart God had given me was not fully in alignment with what they were telling me I needed to think and feel and believe. It was wildly confusing for me.
Yeah.
But books were my escape. And I think that this will kind of lead into my young adulthood. We remember my mom burned all of her secular books. But because I was a huge reader, I would go comb through the library. We had a little library at home, and I was always looking for something I hadn't read yet. And I found one book in there, and it was, it was like on Civil War stuff, and it looked fairly innocent, but I read it and there was some
Civil War
super explicit sexual escapades in this book, very detailed. And I found this was when I was maybe 7.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And my mom and dad would,
so it like awakened stuff then.
Oh my gosh.
In you.
Oh my gosh. I totally did. And I knew that it was forbidden because if we were watching TV and like even a married couple kissed, mom and dad would be like, don't look at that. Like that was dirty. And so that was kind of sewn into me. And I came across this and I'm like, whoa. And it was like mechanics and everything. So I'm like trying to imagine.
At 7.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I couldn't talk to anyone about this, right? Because I knew it was wrong. But all of a sudden I had all this like imagery in my mind and, I don't know, but it also sounded like desirable because it, described like this romance and the woman was important and she was loved and she was significant. And those are things that I was looking for in my life. So it really did start this obsession where I was checking books secretly out of the library that were really erotic. And yes. And then I also had a bus buddy who much later I learned had been molested at age 4.
Wow.
And she would share explicit
4?
Explicit stories with me on the bus. And so it became this whole, I had this whole fantasy life that nobody knew about, never talked about. But also it led me to really romanticize sex. And it romanticized, I don't know why, but they're all the books were about these guys who are really rebellious and probably not so good for you. But then this woman comes and she changes him and it's amazing and he loves her.
And that's not a real narrative at all. But it's definitely not biblical.
I believed it though. I fully believed that was out there somewhere. And I was one day, I never dreamed of being a mom. A lot of my friends would be like, oh, I couldn't wait to be a mom. I just wanted to be a wife, no children. And I wanted to be, adored by my husband. And that's who Jesus is meant to be in our life, right? Yeah. But it was all I had this weird view of God and I was desiring love and affection and adoration from somewhere. I didn't experience that at home.
Yeah. And I just want to say that codependency, I believe, is something that is implanted in us because we are supposed to be dependent on God and anything else is perverted. So I feel like we are supposed to be codependent, but it's only on him. And it's just so easy when that's innate in us. It is something that God put in us to be dependent on him. We are his children and we're supposed to be looking to him for that. But it's just so easy. The enemy just has these plants essentially in the world. And man, you had some planted seeds at a very young age.
I sure did. Yes. And so that's, those are the highlights of my childhood.
I didn't hear anything. Super high.
Some lowlights.
Yeah.
So I kind of, throughout my childhood, I reinforced any of these ideas that I'm responsible. I'm responsible for others' feelings. I'm responsible for the outcome in others' lives, like my siblings. And that also I'll receive love if I perform. And maybe I could receive love one day if I was in a sexual relationship with Mr. Perfect rebel out there.
That you're going to make perfect, right?
Of course. Yes. Yeah. Picture. Oh my gosh.
I just see Kris Ann with the whip get on, buddy.
Oh my gosh. Oh, and think of Grease. Grease the movie, like Sandra Dee, and I was the very studious girl and I'm it was no fun. But I was when she amped it up and got out the leather leggings. Then she got the boy and it was so good. Yeah. So I was full on, this is happening someday. That was my fantasy. I was obsessed. Obsessed.
The pink ladies, the leather jackets. So that kind of wraps up your family kind of segment. Any other thoughts, Robyn? Did you have any codependency things in your growing up that?
Yeah, and I was just reflecting on how much I think that was because I was a peacemaker, but there was so much rockiness growing up. And my mom, I think my mom and dad had a very codependent relationship. My dad was an alcoholic and my mom was, and he would yell at her and just, and she was just trying to make everything right and trying to give excuses for his behavior and trying to keep the family unit together. And so I learned that kind of behavior as a child. And then my brothers were very rebellious and causing all kinds of problems. So then I wanted to be the one good thing in the family and at home and wanted to be loved. And so I went into perfectionism, studying and trying to get attention, feeling good about myself that way, because that's how, all my worth was definitely in what I do and what I achieve. And then in relationships and getting into boyfriends way too early, losing my virginity way too early. And then even my first husband, it's my gosh, I just feel so bad for that girl, that I was literally, that girl who's not me anymore, but man, because I was literally, from the time I started dating him, he was not wanting to date but I chased and pursued, and then finally he finally will admit to the rest of the world that he's dating me. And then it was, again, that sacrificing myself for him all the time, being like this super woman, right? That everybody else would tell me how amazing I am, except for him.
Wow.
You know, and trying to earn that, like, surely he's going to see how amazing I am, you know, and it just never happened, you know? Yes. And then it was like, well, once he marries me, you know, and then he ended up leaving shortly after that. It's crazy
the amount of lies that you tell yourself in those positions.
Yes.
Wow.
And I just thought, because I saw my parents struggle pretty much their whole marriage when I was at home, I was just like, well, this is just how it is. It's just hard. Yes. Relationships are hard. You work through things, and, you know, but not realizing that is so not God's best. And I deserved so much more. Yeah. And honestly, it's just the grace of God, because I still carried a lot of that into meeting Steve.
Wow.
But he valued me. And he believed in me not sacrificing myself all the time. It was not just one-sided. He's not a narcissist. Yeah, you know, there's too many of those out there. And for the peacemakers that don't have any self-worth, they're like magnets to narcissists.
Absolutely. I think we have an odor. I don't know what it is. Yeah.
And so I just, you know, it's just crazy. So I relate a lot, and I see the little girl in me growing up and going, oh yeah, that makes sense. How I turned out the way I did. But it's by God's grace that he could show that. And there's still parts of me that he's still working on.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
for sure.
Yeah. The value and the self-criticism. I think that's what I struggle with probably the most still. Yeah. And my husband's just like, really? I mean, he's trying to be patient with me, but he's just like, good gravy. Are you still, you know, how many times do I have to tell you? You know, he's gracious, but I can relate to that a lot. And it's given me a lot of food for thought, just thinking about how I'm parenting, and am I carrying any stuff from my childhood into my parenting right now that I shouldn't be, and I need to be repenting of. And I'm thinking about conversations I'm going to have when I get home, you know, with my kiddos, you know. I mean, I literally had a conversation with my son. You know, he's very disappointed about a vacation we're going to take because
we won't get into this right now. But they're going to Mexico, and he is like butthurt about this. I'm like, you can take me.
And you're including him?
Yeah.
And he's not.
He doesn't want to go.
He can
stay here.
So he's complaining.
He can babysit River.
He's literally complaining to everybody about us going on this vacation, you know. And I was like getting perturbed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand.
And I'm just like,
I am too.
Yeah. But you know, I had to, like, as you're talking, I'm thinking, you know, I was getting kind of upset with him yesterday, and I'm lecturing him, you know, and I'm like, how would it feel if you were spending a bunch of money and time thinking about how you could bless me, getting this gift together, and before you even gave me the gift, I started complaining that you're giving me this gift and how awful it's going to be. And, you know, like, how would that make you feel? You know, and I'm telling him how his behavior and his choices are making me feel, and trying to make him feel guilty for it. Right. To try to change his behavior. But the reality is, what I should have done and what I'm going to do when I get home is to say, hey buddy, I just want to acknowledge, like, you're disappointed because you'd rather ski, and you're disappointed because you're going to miss out on youth group for a week. And these disappointments are real. Yeah. And I want to validate those and just acknowledge that's real. And let me give you a hug. And I'm sorry that those are there. But let's not let them steal the joy of going on a vacation with your family and enjoying being together, because what happens is you steal the joy from everybody else. Absolutely. Sadly, when you're just complaining the whole time. And so I can meet him there, but not blame him for me being perturbed and letting my emotions get you know, bothered or offended by him being a teenage boy.
That's huge.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I need to do that more.
That's good. Mm-hmm. That's very good.
So I think it's good.
Yeah.
Trying to root those things out. That and talking about the religious stuff, that's totally something I would do. I would burn all the books. I would throw all the music. I totally would. And I'm like, oh, okay, Lord, help me. Because that totally is me. You know, like there's not, you know, and I'm thinking, are there any war books that we got in our house? Honestly, because
look innocent.
Yes.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm totally like, maybe that's why my son is so into these war books, you know, because there's probably stuff in there that I don't want, you know. But so on one hand, I do want to shelter my kids from this stuff. I don't want my 7-year-old to have that experience of reading that kind of material, right?
Yeah.
But we don't also want to like go to crazy extremes either. So I still am learning that balance, you know, and my kids get teased all the time that they live under a rock. And I'm like, you know what? That's fine. You'll be out of that rock someday. But I want to keep you under there as long as I have you, you know, but, you know, is there a point in which that's not healthy? And I want to make sure that they feel like they can voice things that are different than what we believe so that we can talk those things out. I was thinking about that.
Huge.
It is huge. I think the voice piece is significant.
Yeah. And I think it can be really dangerous. And I've seen that happen. I grew up in a homeschool home from, gosh, I think it was like 6th grade to 12th grade. And we were kind of in that space of my parents weren't ultra religious, definitely grew up in a Christian home, but it was not like uber religious or something like that. But there were other families that we would consider that it was like that uber religion where it was like they couldn't do anything. They couldn't listen to any secular music, nothing. And it was interesting because they would sneak it because they couldn't talk about it in the open. And I've seen that with people with alcoholism too. I've seen people hide it because they can't talk about it. And I've noticed that. And when it becomes shameful and you're hiding it, it's such a better thing if you can like talk about it and just be like, you know what? I really like this song, because guess what? Not every single song that is secular is bad. And that's the thing, that if we can have conversations about these things and be like, you know what, this is why I don't want you listening to this particular artist. Look at it. If it has an E on it and it says explicit, then we can have a conversation and be like, you know what, this is actually harmful and this is why. But it's just opening that dialogue and conversation, but not necessarily like blanketing everything as like bad. So I remember my brother, he used to have this one guy over for sleepovers, and my mom and I, we would be in the kitchen making food, and something that we would do a lot is we would have music playing, and we would have Bee Gees playing a lot. That was like a typical thing, but I really liked Avril Lavigne at the time. And I would have like a Skater Boy, you know, blaring, and it was just going. And that boy came out and he said, I really like this song. So he was sneak listening to that music. And then I talked to his sister about it later, and I'm like, you know, he likes Avril. And then she's like, oh, absolutely not. No, like we do not allow Avril Lavigne or any secular music in our house. And I'm like, well, he likes it, but he would lie to them. He would say to them, like, no, like he would not be exposed to that. But it's like, he would. I don't know if he had his little cassette recorder or a compact disc and he was just like listening to it when no one was around. But it just like shut down those doors of communication between him and his family. And the really heartbreaking thing is that mom now, she does not go to church anymore, and she just stays at home in fear, and she does not come out of her home. Like she is completely, like when those kids left, like everything in her life was surrounded homeschooling them, taking care of them, shielding them from the world. And now they're all out living their lives. Like he's a Colorado ski instructor. The daughter lives in Texas, is married with a kid. And then the other one's doing well also. But she is at home and like not doing anything anymore. And it's just like the interesting thing to me that I think about is just like communication with our kids, talking about them, like what is healthy, what is wrong, what is good, you know, because not everything that's secular is bad, but there are absolutely things that we do need to talk to them about and not awaken things that should be awakened. Like we talked about this in an episode last week about not awakening love. And when you talked about that, Kris Ann, that was just heartbreaking. Like 7 is such a ripe,
oh my gosh,
young age to have that seed planted.
Absolutely. I have an 8-year-old and I can't, I honestly cannot imagine him trying to process the things that I read.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think explaining the reasons why behind things,
definitely,
besides just having these rigid rules, is so important. You know, and we've had those conversations about music in our house because, again, you know, I'm Miss Rigid, so I don't allow a whole lot of music that's not Christian playing in my house, instrumental, that kind of stuff. But it's because I'll look at the lyrics and we'll go through the lyrics together. And I'm like, look, okay, is this godly lyrics? And, you know, sometimes they don't even realize what they're listening to or realize what they're
innuendos
singing.
In songs. You know, that's one thing. They do a lot of Instagram reels about like songs, and then they'll show like these things that, oh yeah, like I used to party in 2000. I used to think like everything was good. And then they like play the lyrics back and you listen to what you were jamming at in 2000, you, Janet Jackson.
Oh my gosh.
Back in the day.
Yes. It's horrible. Horrible. Hypersexual music, right? And so that's what I grew up with, right? No wonder I lost my virginity at 15, right? Because all this stuff at MTV, I mean, that was my life growing up. I mean, it's just bombarded with all of that. So then me going through that, I'm like, I don't want that from my kids. I don't want my daughter bumping and grinding and thinking that that's cool. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I was doing at her age. She's 12, you know, and that's what I grew up believing, that's what women do. That's how they get their validation. That's, you know, and it's just harmful. But, you know, so my son will come to me who loves music. I mean, that is his gift. He is, you know, we learned about different types of intelligence. He's not a book's intelligence. He's musically intelligent. And so he loves music. So for me to put a cap on what he can listen to is hard for him. But he'll come to me now and he's like, oh, Mom, these lyrics of this song is just horrible, you know? And so he's now doing it for himself, thankfully.
Yes, because you've taught him how to.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry. I'm just literally having like flashbacks of when I was a kid listening to Chingy right there. Do you know that song?
I don't know that one.
I'm laughing at you laughing.
I would like blare that song like in the garage. I'd be cleaning or whatever, doing something, and my dad would just like walk by and he's like, absolutely not. Like, turn that trash off right now. Yeah. But I remember I would just have that all the way up, cranked up. It's just terrible.
Now we're going to have to go home and listen to it, see what you're talking about.
I'll play it on the speakers for you guys.
So I think it's just a beautiful conversation because hopefully it'll help a lot of people. One, go back like I was looking at my life and saying, okay, there's a lot of reasons why I stumbled into what I did when I was a young adult and why I still struggle with some of the thought patterns I still do to this day that the Lord's helping me through. And then also as we're now parents, which most of the people listening are going to be, you know, what can we do to prevent that? Hopefully with God's grace, right? Of repeating those cycles in our life.
Yeah. One final point that I want to bring up because it was addressed on here, but it was that suppression of emotions, of not being able to bring up anger, not being able to be sad. That's definitely something that I grew up with. It was on one particular side of our family. It was all about stuffing the emotions. And then you keep stuffing and stuffing and stuffing. And then guess what? That anger has to come out eventually. So for me, it would be explosions, not myself, but just family dynamics where I would just be stuff it down, stuff it down, stuff it down, because there was not a healthy environment or openness in the environment to allow those conversations to be normal and to be had. And it was just heartbreaking. Like, I think about it now and I look back and it just makes me so sad to live in that environment where you feel like you have to have everything okay, always put on a smile. Like, that's not real life. That's not reality. Right. And I know we talked about this with Pastor Kevin a few weeks ago too, but it's just like even going into church and again, just putting on that smile, making sure that everyone around me is happy. And one thing that I talked to with my own pastor recently was when things are hard, it's really interesting because I'll get the question. It's a very common question, but it's like, how are you doing today?
Oh yeah.
And it, you know, for me, I'm such a real person that if I'm not good, I don't want to just be like, oh, I'm good, because that's just not me. Like, me being me is just being real and open and just being like, hey, I'm going through kidney stones right now. And I'm going through an ear infection. You know, I'm battling like fear and insecurities and anxieties, you know, like that's just the things that God is helping me through. And I talk about him all the time. And I talk about how he's preparing me and helping me through all of these things. And so when I shared that with my pastor recently, it's just like, you know, what do you do when you get that question and you don't want to give the whole enchilada to everyone because that's not necessary or needed. Not everyone needs to know that, and nor would they want to. But with my friends, you know, I know that there's that openness and, you know, I could talk about that. But he said that he likes to say, like, God is with me. And I love that because like that is true. No matter what we're going through. And you know, you can use that in different conversations, right? So if you were just like having that quick question at church and it's not something you want to dive into, just, you know, saying something like that. So you can still be like real, like God is with me, but you don't have to like divulge and pretend like everything's great all the time because it's not. But at the same time, it's like, I do want hopefully more of that healthiness for our listeners and myself included going forward, in that we don't have to pretend, you know, and it's just, it is so important to have good conversations, real conversations, and find out the things that maybe we're struggling with that we don't even realize. But sometimes if we just put a mask on and pretend, I'm like really against that. And it can be just so wrong. And I mean, Rob and I even had conversations today that were really good, really helpful, and like expose things that need to be exposed. And when you find like the root of it, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, that's what I was dealing with. But if you don't have those conversations and you just stuff it down and you take it in and you just feast on a thought that maybe you shouldn't be feasting on, you can go to places that it shouldn't be. So if we're always pretending that we're always okay, there's some real harm in that, like detrimental harm that can ruin relationships with your family, your friends, like everything. So anyway, I think this has been really good talking about this. So thank you, Kris Ann.
It was reminding me of growing up too. For me, I think I struggled with some of those same things. I was super anxious, right? I was trying to be perfect. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone. And so I, like you, was struggling with fear. And I went to my parents and asked for therapy. And because I literally felt like I could not do life anymore. I was just so like falling apart.
I felt that way in the past week. I did.
And so, I mean, so I remember being, I think I was 14 or 15 at the dinner table, and I just kind of like fell apart crying. And I just said, I need therapy. And the response was, you're perfect. Like I see you holding the whole world above your head and you manage everything so well. I don't know what you're talking about. That was their response.
Wow.
And so thankfully with time, they agreed. And I did go to counseling, and that was one of the best things that ever happened to me as a teenager, to help me through paralyzing anxiety. So
what a gift that you got that opportunity. I experienced suicidal ideation in 8th grade, like heavily. And I expressed that to my school counselor. So my parents got a call, but they had such a condemning perspective on anyone who needed mental health help. Just very condemning. The things that they condemned in the home were divorce and mental health issues. And they spoke very disparagingly about people who struggled with that in our community. Wow. So I love that you got to where you could do that in your childhood at home, because I did see someone briefly because they felt obligated, but they're like, we don't think you really need this. So I wasn't supported in it at all.
Man. Well, hopefully that'll be maybe a nudging that some parent needs.
Yeah.
Like maybe they see their teenager at home struggling. Maybe that teenager is not going to come to you and ask for therapy like I did.
Yeah.
But maybe you need to think about it. Maybe you need to reach out to a Kris Ann or an Angie or a Kevin. And at least they are biblically, you know, like the person I met with was not a Christian. So I would have wished that for my young self, right? But we have resources out there of amazing men and women who love God, and they counsel people based on the word of God. And we might need to be the people to bring that up for our children.
That's good.
I mean, I have one of my children going, and because they need it.
Yeah,
you know, so let's be thinking about that and watching for the signs and cues that maybe they're needing help.
Yeah, breaking the chains, you know, that have been maybe generational curses in our families, our bloodlines. You know, it's time to break those off. So yeah.
So good.
Well, thank you, Kris Ann.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this was part 1, and we're going to continue conversation. So tune in next week for more on this as well.
Yeah. Do you want to pray us out?
Sure. Yeah. Well, Father God, I just thank you for this opportunity to chat with Kris Ann today and Robyn. And I just thank you for everything that you have revealed to Kris Ann and things that you've set her free and delivered her from. And the same goes for Robyn and I too. We're just so thankful for you and for your work in our lives, God. Just everything that you're doing. You are so good. And we just want to give you all the glory and all the honor for everything that you've revealed to us. And I thank you for each one of our listeners. I pray that as things were maybe exposed to them today, things that they were able to see for the first time, maybe, I pray that you just give them the grace, the clarity, the guidance on how to approach these things going forward, and for just true deliverance and freedom and healing for our listeners, God. And no blame, no shame for parents, grandparents, you know, anyone who, you know, was trying to do their best, but maybe missed it, like we all do, right? Like none of us are perfect, God. So I just thank you for grace in this for those around us, and, you know, no condemnation for, you know, say a family member or anything like that, but just that you really help us navigate this conversation in a healthy way. And that freedom abounds in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. If you liked what you heard, make sure you share it with your friends, and also subscribe so when we do release a new episode, you will be the first to know it.
And please be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook. We also have a new Facebook group where you guys can come in and dive into conversation with us, ask us questions. So we would love to see you there as well.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing you there.